spooky friends. Welcome to another episode of the Scaryish podcast.
Woo!
I'm Robin Grace. This is Adam Diaz.
Hello there.
And today we're here, as we are each week, to talk about some interesting spooky-ish topics.
Indeed. Spooky-ish. I guess
Scary-ish.
We're rebranding, folks. Going to start a new show. No, I'm very excited about this episode. I actually took a suggestion from a spooky friend, and that became my topic, so it's going to be pretty interesting. I'm covering the Kilmainham jail. Robin, what are you going to be covering this week?
This week I'm going to cover Deadman's Island.
It's a pretty solid name for an island if you want it to be spooky-ish, as we now know ourselves.
Yeah. Yep.
So are you going to be going first, or am I going to be going first?
I'll go ahead and get right into it. So this week I'm going to cover a creepy, haunted, pretty history-deep place. I'm not going to cover a lot of the history, but this place has been around for a while, obviously. Well, not obviously. You have no idea what it's about. It's obvious to me. But
it's good to hear you're not covering a lot of the history, because my place is also very history rich. Yeah. And I'm covering a lot of the history.
So you're going to have a lot of knowledge nugs.
Yeah, there's a lot of spooky knowledge nugs to come.
This one, okay, so apparently, Deadman's Island, there is one in the UK. So there's one in the UK, but this one, I'm just going to head right on over the border to our neighbor, Canada.
Gotcha.
So the one we're going to be covering is the one in Canada.
This is the Canadian Deadman's Island, where they're much more polite than anywhere else.
Sure, I guess. And it's funny because the name of this island just seems like it's something out of a freaking Pirates of the Caribbean movie or something like that. And before I start, I just want to say that if I come off as odd or something like that, it's because
she is odd. That's just sort of our personalities. Back off.
I just turned a live report in at midnight. It's way past. It's 3:00 right now.
It's the witching hour right now, y'all.
It's literally about to turn 3. And my brain's just fried. Its finals is coming up. It's gonna be crazy. Hopefully you guys like this episode and I don't ramble a lot. All right.
Too late.
Fuck you. From any random bystander's standard, this morbidly named place is pretty idyllic. It really looks nice from the outside. It's covered in trees, at least what it looks like from pictures that I've seen. It's pretty green. It's pretty cute. Pretty nice. Be that as it may, it's this place just south of Stanley Park, Deadman's Island, in Cole Harbour, in Vancouver, British Columbia, in Canada.
Gotcha.
Lots of many things I had to go through to get there. It's there.
Now we know exactly where it is.
Yeah. So this place has a pretty dark history, and it kind of forces you to do a double take, because even though it looks really nice, a lot of stuff happened here, and we're going to get into it. So, the local indigenous Squamish name for this place is just Island. There are some sources that say that the island is called like Island of the Dead, but it's not. Most of the things that I saw is that it just means island. That's it. I'm not going to say the actual word because I don't know how to pronounce it. When I saw it typed out, there was a 7 in it. I'm like, I don't even know how to pronounce this 7. You know what I mean? But I'm sure there's somebody out there who's like, I can pronounce that for you, you know? So if you know how to pronounce it, that'd be great. So this place took on the description or the designation of Deadman's Island in 1937 when the Geographical Names Board of Canada deemed it so. So they were like, that's what we're calling it now. I don't know why. They just chose to do that in 1937.
That's pretty odd, but I don't know. Maybe they thought it would bring in more tourists that way? I don't know.
I don't know.
Wildly speculating.
I don't know if there were just so many legends that surrounded it that they were just like, we're just going to go with this. People keep nicknaming it that anyway. That's what it's going to be. The first settlers there were the coastal Salish Indian tribes who occupied the area since 600 AD. So they were around for a really long time. I know, well, in that side of Canada, right, they had that crossing that froze over that you could just walk over from wherever. Everything was kind of connected, those two continents. So I'm not surprised, that there were people that settled there in 600 AD, because people used to be able to just walk back and forth, I guess. I don't know. I didn't live back then.
You're able to walk back and forth most places, but yeah, if that's what you're looking for, it certainly wouldn't be wasted as long as it was wintertime.
Well, there was Pangea and all that fun stuff, but during the winter.
600 AD.
But between these continents.
You remember when Pangea broke apart back in like year 1000? That was nuts.
Obviously, I'm really tired, but no, yeah. So people occupied that area since 600 AD. That's forever ago. In 1862, a man named John Morton, one of Vancouver's first white settlers, visited the island. And he actually had to row there, of course. It's 1862. I'm sure, were there boats in 1862? There had to have been. Mechanical, industrial boats.
Industrial boats? I don't know when like steam engine boats came out. But if you're asking if there was boats in 1862, I'll refer back to 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
Oh. Oh my god, guys, it's really late.
You can tell that the subject she was doing had a lot of math in it. Not like, history or geography.
It's so late. I'm very not good with history or geography, but I've just been doing numbers, crunching numbers, making graphs all night, and I'm just so...
When are boats? That's basically what Robin just asked.
When are boats? I'm just exhausted. Okay. There were boats. Fuck. Yeah, he rowed over to this island. There he discovered hundreds of these red cedar boxes, and these boxes were tied to the upper branches of trees. So, we'll post a picture on Instagram and Facebook later, but it's just this strange thing where you have these trees and these boxes just stacked up into them. It's really interesting. Upon touching one of these boxes, it kind of like disintegrated and broke open, and showered him with the morbid things inside.
Gross.
So within this box was a pretty terrifying discovery. It was a bunch of human bones intermixed with a bunch of black hair. Does hair decay like a body does? Or does it like when, I don't know, when you turn into bones, is there...
I'm sure hair decomposes or decays at some point. I have no idea at what rate it does.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I would be basing my guess solely off of that scene at the end of Last Crusade when the guy just rapidly decomposes. Okay. And honestly, it's too late for me to remember if he had hair when he was like, what's happening to me? Fucking love that movie.
He chose
poorly. So what you're telling me right now is this guy rowed his boat gently down this stream, showed up on this island, and found a bunch of coffins hanging in the trees that turned out to be the least fun piñatas of all time.
Well, fuck. Yeah, pretty much.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay.
So apparently what this island was what the Squamish people deemed to be tree burial grounds. And a burial tree is what a number of peoples used to support corpses or coffins. I don't think a lot of people practice this today, but it used to be something that was pretty common among the Balinese, the Naga people, certain Aboriginal tribes of Australia, and some North American First Nations. I also want to point out that Naga peoples are from India, and they're not the Mer people from World of Warcraft.
I wasn't going to make that joke because I had no idea that was actually a name of a group of people and wasn't just some random name from World of Warcraft. Good to know. Yeah. I'm an idiot.
Yeah. The first time I ever heard Naga was in World of Warcraft, so that's why I had to put that out there, because when I read that, I was like, no way.
Nerdy side note, Blizzard, why don't you make the Naga a playable race? Takes you long enough. I'd come back. # just saying.
Okay. Yeah, so this tree would be the final resting place, kind of as an alternative to a grave that we kind of do today, Sometimes it was necessary, as seen in a number of cultures, because during the winter, the ground would freeze and they couldn't, dig it up and bury it. Yeah. So the person would be wrapped up carefully in a robe or a blanket, and then they would be placed in the tree. And they would try to tie it to the heaviest branch. I know, I've seen posts, like news posts. Have you ever seen the ones where they actually have them on the side of cliffs? Coffins that they put on the side of cliffs?
No.
Yeah, the people do that too. Different cultures just do these different things. It's really interesting.
Never seen that.
So many would have some of their personal treasures or their personal belongings laid with them. Other reasons for a burial this way would include preventing the grave from being walked over by people or animals, kind of as a sign of respect sort of thing. They might have wanted to protect their loved ones from being dug up by animals or washed up from rains. There was one that I saw where they have these things called burial towers, something like that, where it's just like you have a platform on sticks, kind of like when we watched In Alone, the guy would put his food up there.
Right.
They would put their bodies up there, and then they would be able to talk to them by having them up there.
Aw,
yeah,
that's
so that's
nice.
kind of cool. It's pretty interesting practice, but it certainly makes some sense when you read up on the reasoning of it, because people that bury people underground probably are like, why would you put them up in a tree? But when you read about it and you kind of learn about it, you're like, well, that's
It's like it's just like how a different culture would be like, why would you bury someone?
Right. And I find it pretty interesting. So,
like, that's how you get haunted everything, because you build on top of that. It's like, I don't know. We're into it.
Anyway, after Morton came across this island, despite his findings, he decided that he wanted to own it. So
That's weird. But okay.
yeah, he wanted to. I'm sure it's just this nice little plot of land. He's like, I want to do XYZ with it. I know I found this weird stuff, but I kind of want to go along with the plan that I have. It took the chief of the local Squamish tribe, Chief Joe Capilano, who, by the way, fought a lot for like First Nation rights and things like that. He was really a big deal back in the day. This guy had to tell him that the island was quote unquote dead ground, and about its bloody history for him to kind of change his mind. So he had to be told all this stuff in order to be like, nah, yeah, you know what? You're right. I'm good.
So he had to be convinced the island that had boxes of dead people hanging from trees wasn't a great place to settle.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Not the brightest bulb in the bulb drawer. It's 3 a.m. I can't remember how that
I was
expression
going to
goes.
say, we don't have bulbs in the drawer. They're in cabinets, silly.
Not the sharpest knife in the light bulb drawer. Gotcha.
Not the sharpest pencil in the... Do people call
Lead
them
shed. I don't know. Just keep going.
Okay. Apparently, the island had been the scene of a bloody battle between rival northern and southern tribes that resulted in about 200 warriors being killed. What supposedly happened was there were 200 women, elderly, and children that were kidnapped. So the warriors traded themselves for the release of the hostages. Upon their surrender, these warriors were immediately killed. With the island only spanning about 2.5 acres, that's really not a lot of space for a lot of death. An American football field is about 1.3 acres. So 2 American football fields. That's how big this island is.
Okay.
Or small, I guess, if you want to put it that way.
This is in Canada, though, so it's a Canadian football field. Their end zones are a little bit longer, so
No.
even less space.
I'm telling you, American football field.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right. So
I get it confused because we have imperial and Canadians have metric, so American football field doesn't match Canadian football field. It's fucking weird.
I had to look it up because the original measurement was hectares, and I was like, I don't know what the fuck a hectare is.
I love hectares. It's my favorite way to measure things. Thanks to The Simpsons.
What?
He buys a car where the guy's like, it's 600 hectares and a single tank of kerosene.
Oh my god.
Goodbye.
Anyway. Yeah, so that's a small area for 200 people to die all at once. At least I think so. I mean, imagine a football field. How many people play on a football field at once?
I think it's 56 people per team. Not playing on it at once. I mean, it's 11 players per team on the field at any given time. So
22 people. And they take up a good amount of space on the field, I think. I don't know. It looks to me like there's not that much space to run around, but there probably is. It's fucking 3 a.m. Okay, whatever. But it's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of people to die on a small area.
yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
I mean, 1 is a lot of people to die in a small area. You're trying to be like conservative about these numbers.
Legend has it that a quote-unquote fire flower sprouted the next day where the men fell, which frightened the enemies enough for them to just retreat and abandon the land. They left claiming that the land was plagued with black magic. And how the flowers were kind of written about, it was like these beautiful, beautiful red flowers that sprouted. But they knew that underneath these flowers was like the beating hearts or the blood of the people that died, which I find both poetic and
morbid as fuck.
Yes. Native people look at the land as a place only suited for burying the dead. But other people that come in don't necessarily see it that way. Settlers continued using this island as a cemetery. There are more deaths than those, of course, of the people, the 200 people, because there always are, and there probably always will be. You know, people don't live forever. But there were Canadian Pacific Railway workers who died during the construction of the railway that they buried there. The Great Vancouver Fire of 1886, those victims are buried there. The graves were just shallow plots and placed wherever there was space between the trees. There wasn't any designated way of I don't know, filing these graves. They kind of just put them where they could find space. They were marked with simple wooden crosses, pickets, headboards, or simply not even marked at all sometimes. This continued until the opening of Mountain View Cemetery within the city of Vancouver in 1887. And then between the years of 1888 and 1892, the island became a quarantine site for victims of smallpox.
That happens so often to these haunted islands, because we had to look up the other island that I covered on episode 20.
What was it called?
Pagliova or something like that.
Paglavia?
And that one was one for Black Plague and 2 for lepers was a quarantine island too. So
yeah. So this island kind of became a burial site for those that didn't survive this epidemic. Some people, if you got better, you could leave. If not, you were there until you died, you know? I mean, even when you died, I guess, not until you died, because they didn't okay, so in 1899, a man named Theodore Ludgate caused all this drama. He leased the island from the government to people not too happy about it. The mayor at the time, James Garden, went with police to try and prevent Ludgate from clearing the land, because that's what he wanted to do. He just wanted to log everything, and just flatten it, right? When the mayor got there with all the police, because he took a fuck ton of police, they read them the Vancouver Riot Act after a showdown between Ludgate and 30 of his men and the police. It was the first ever reading of the Vancouver Riot Act.
That's interesting.
That I found that very interesting. History, knowledge nug. There you go. If you ever wondered, the Riot Act prevents gatherings of 12 or more people illegally. That's just what their law is, if you wondered.
Gotcha. Seems like it's pertinent in today's world.
After that, it was kind of like, bye-bye Ludgate, get out of here. He escaped arrest, but police kept watch over the island while there was this legal battle going on for Ludgate to get permission to proceed to build the sawmill he wanted to build and log the island. By 1911, so that's, a decade later, Ludgate finally won. He cleared the island of both trees and the squatter community that had kind of sprouted up there. With all that done, he wasn't actually able to meet the terms of his lease. Not sure if that means payment-wise or other, but the island fell back into government hands. So he cleared that island.
So he showed up, did exactly what they didn't want him to do, and then wound up defaulting on his terms to own the island or lease it or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it's like, it went back to the government. And they're like, thanks, dickhead. Like, this is exactly what we did not want.
Yeah. So in 1930, the island was then offered to the city of Vancouver by the federal government for use as a park. And somewhere I read it was like a 99-year lease to the city or something like that. And no park was ever built, but it was turned into a Canadian Royal Navy naval training base or training station called the HMCS Discovery.
Interesting.
And that was in 1944. So most reports these days are from naval reservists that experience things on base. And they also started almost immediately after the opening of the base. They just started coming with reports of stuff.
It's literally an ancient Native American burial ground.
Oh my God, yeah, you're totally right.
This is not a good idea.
There are stories of the sights of ghosts, glowing figures appearing through the trees, and loud, unexplained clanging noises like chains in the middle of the night. Some hear the sound of impatient pacing back and forth. There are those that say that they hear the moaning of a young woman sobbing.
Not happy moaning.
Yes, that's why I had to add sobbing. Furniture is sometimes heard being moved upstairs on the upper levels when no one else could possibly be doing it. In 1909, police were occupying the island overnight to keep the loggers at bay. This is before Ludgate was able to get his hands all over it.
Right.
The police claimed that they heard the rattling of bones and the shrieking of skeletons, and that they were threatened to haunt anyone who tried to cut down the trees of the island. Obviously, that could be chalked up to just people wanting to scare them and make sure no one logged the island.
I didn't know skeletons could shriek. Maybe that's just me, because like it's a skeleton. He doesn't have vocal cords anymore.
I've watched Corpse Bride. Skeletons can sing. Okay, they can do whatever they want to.
I've never seen it, so I'll take your word for it. Oh, Robin acts shocked that I told her I haven't seen a movie for the 10th fucking time.
Corpse Bride is so good. Yeah, okay, have you seen... Oh, man. Do you just not like Tim Burton movies because you don't like Nightmare Before Christmas?
I don't dislike Tim Burton movies. I just haven't gone on my way to watch them. Like, I watched Edward Scissorhands when I was a kid. I watched Batman and Batman Returns. Those are Edward... No, not Edward. Those are Tim Burton movies. But yeah, after that, I was just like, okay, Johnny Depp, Helena Bonham Carter. I fucking get it. Tim Burton, thank you.
Oh my god, okay. So who really knows what those sounds really were? Because it could have been people being like, yo, stay away. Or it could be like, go, 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 go. So, you know, I'll let you guys just decide what you want it to be. Ludgate's lease obviously didn't pan out. Maybe he was haunted for logging the island.
Let's hope so.
Maybe. It could have been the ghosts actually haunting him, or him just being punished with bad luck for doing what he did. Reservists also report being pushed or tapped by unseen hands, or hear the sound of spooky chanting. That would freak me out. Rhythmic chanting, I don't know why. It's disconcerting.
Who knows? Like in 50 years, someone might hear like, hey, hey, ho, hey, ho, hey, hey, ho, hey, ho.
I'm watching this show on Hulu right now called Black Narcissus or something. I don't know how to pronounce that word.
I think you said it right.
I did? Oh, yeah. But there's a point where there's nuns in it praying, and this place is supposed to be haunted, so it kind of freaks me out because of like the rhythmic praying. And it's not that it's a bad prayer or anything like that. It's just that rhythmic chanting freaks me out. It's just, I don't know why, it's just disconcerting. Things also go randomly missing or end up in places that they have no business being in. One of the storage areas that was once used to hold prisoners is known to be the location of a bit of ghost activity. According to the stories told around the base, a young worker on the island during wartime, I'm assuming like Gulf War or something like that, hung himself within a cell after being imprisoned there for theft. I don't know.
That's sad.
That's really sad. It's supposedly been haunted ever since. One famous story on the base about it being haunted is from a leading seaman named Anne Marie Hamilton. And though the base has no overnight stays, everyone kind of locks up and then goes home at night, save guards at the gate. I mean, those are the only ones that kind of stay. They have to check people coming in, right?
Right.
She ends up getting permission to stay, finish up some work, and she stays in building number 1. Building number 1 seems to be the site of most of the activity on base. That evening, she woke up to the sound of 2 men walking up the outside stairwell, and she could hear them talking as they climbed the steps to the 3rd floor. Once there, they proceeded to move around furniture from the sound of it, like from what she could hear, and kept opening and closing doors. For about 30 minutes, she heard all this noise. And then she heard silence. She found it really odd that there would be anyone there at all because she was the only one that had permission to be there, you know?
Can you imagine it was ghosts casually clocking in for their shift? Oh, we gotta move the fucking furniture again. It's so heavy. There's no one even here to hear this.
She assumed they were just there like she was, some important business to attend to or catch up on or something like that. When she asked the front gate guardsman about what she had heard, she was told that she'd been the only one there and that no one else had arrived through any of the gates. So that's weird. In 1991, during the Gulf War, leading seaman C. Gran experienced the sound of the large double doors between the main building and the drill hall, witnessed it like opening and slamming. That's what he heard. And I'm sure everybody kind of gets used to the sounds that they hear on a daily basis. Like, you would know, like, we know the sound of our front door opening.
Right.
Or the back door sliding open. It's the same thing. He heard this very specific door opening and slamming. He was the only one there at the time and radioed to ask if it may have been somebody else. The only other person there was the guardsman, and he hadn't left his post. When Gran went to check the double doors, they were locked tight. So he's like, what the French toast? Then there's leading seaman Jason Elridge, and he had an experience while he was in an office one day. He heard footsteps rushing down the stairwell this time. He thought he was the only one in the building, which seems to be a theme here. Everyone thinks they're alone. Maybe they're not alone. So he looks out the window to see who would exit the stairwell, and he noticed that the lights were out. So
that's creepy. Who
was running, you know what I mean? Eldridge then called the guard at the front gate, as one probably would, given the situation as all these other people have. The guard, of course, told him that he was the only one inside the base. And as he was on the phone with the guard, he then heard furniture being moved above him. And it surprised him. And as he describes it, it was clear and distinct. It wasn't like some other noise that could have sounded like it. He was like, no, this sounded like stuff being pulled across the floor, you know? Eldridge ran to the stairwell and opened the door only for the sound to immediately stop as he did so. That's creepy. He climbed to the floor above to find it completely empty. There are ways you could probably chalk it up to they went to hide or whatever. When they heard me open the door, they just stopped and hid.
Hear me out. Maybe the third floor is the entrance to some secret base, and there's a bookshelf that you have to open, and it scrapes against the floor or something like that.
What if there is?
That's why no one can stay overnight, because they're like, all right, let's go and do this stupid secret meeting.
Oh man, you've just...
#Illuminati, I cracked it. You gotta let me in. That's how it goes.
So these days, the land ownership is kind of up in the air, because I think the contract with the city is coming up, like it's just ending soon or has ended. I don't remember. But it is still a naval station for now. Many of the First Nation remains were moved to a graveyard nearby, though it's unknown if all the bodies of any further bodies have been exhumed. And they were put underground, of course. They weren't placed in different trees in this new graveyard. Because of the scattered nature of all these bodies and burials, it's likely that there are still some there somewhere, because there really isn't any way to know for sure, because they were all just marked wish-washy willy-nilly. And there were so many that were unmarked, you never know. On a brighter note, this island has been the location for filming things like MacGyver and The Sixth Day with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Wow, both cursed.
Are they?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
I mean, The Sixth Day didn't do very well. MacGyver was a pretty good show.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if
MacGyver
you're talking about
good.
the first iteration or the second iteration, so.
I think it's the first iteration.
Right on. Well, that was pretty good.
Thanks.
I didn't realize there was multiple, what is it called again?
Deadman's Island.
Deadman's Islands out there, but it's good to know that we've covered the Canadian version. At some point in the future, we'll have to cover the UK version. I'm probably going to have to put Deadman's Island and then in parentheses Canadian or something like that in the episode title.
Yeah, do Vancouver.
We'll see. So, good stuff, Robin. All right, before we move into the next topic, we're going to take a quick commercial break, which starts with us telling you about Manscaped. Head over to manscaped.com, check out all their products, and anything that you find, if you put it in your cart, you go to check out, you use the code Scaryish in all caps, you will be getting 20% off and free shipping. That code will last until the end of the month. So as of right now, the Tuesday this releases, the 24th, you have 6 days. It's the perfect time to go shop for people for Christmas. I can go ahead and endorse the product, the Landscaper Lawnmower 3.0. I've actually owned this for quite a while. It is wonderful for sensitive skin. It lasts forever, and it can handle rough, coarse areas as well.
He means the battery lasts forever. But yeah, it's pretty cool. I think it works really well. It's wireless, which is absolutely great.
It's waterproof. It has a headlight on it for if you want to do it in the dark.
Okay. Who wants to shave in the dark? That's dangerous.
I don't know who, but you can. All I'm saying.
I mean, those crevices do get dark. Am I right? Yeah, right now is the perfect time to get those Christmas presents, especially since it's like freaking 4 weeks away.
I can't believe how I shouldn't say how fast this year's gone by, because it has not gone fast. I just can't believe it's already Thanksgiving.
Yes, so get your orders in now for those Christmas gifts.
Indeed. Manscaped.com and use code Scaryish. 20% off and free shipping. So we're going to move into our regular commercial ads right about now. And we're back. So this week I wanted to cover a topic that was suggested to us by the wonderful folks over there in the Discord server. If you would like to join the Discord, go to our website, scaryish.com, and there's a ticker that runs by at the very top. It's like a news organization. And one of those links says, join us on Discord. Click that, and then there's a big Discord icon. If you click that, you join us. It's that simple. And it's just a program that has a big group of chat rooms, basically, and it's all Scaryish related. And if they're not, it's marked like, hey, this is not spooky. But it's just a fun place to hang out. One reason I really wanted to cover a topic from there is because the Discord server is such an integral part of our community, and it's this continuous flow of support for one another, as well as just fun conversation and hilarious memes. It really is. The other reason I wanted to cover a Discord suggestion is because I honestly had no clue what I was going to cover this week, and the suggestion channel there is such a good spot for inspiration. The topic I picked this week actually came from the user known as IndieCred. Don't know their real name, but shout out to you. And it is one that is rich with history and ghosts. So I present to you the Kilmainham jail, which is spelled oddly because it's technically written in a different language. So I watched a million videos to make sure that Gaol is pronounced jail, and it apparently is. So Kilmainham jail is what I am covering. I apologize for any pronunciations I get wrong on this topic. Like I mentioned, I watched a ton of YouTube videos to get these pronunciations down, but I will say there are some variations in what I watched. I'll call out one particular thing that I'm going to try to say and let you know where I got it from. That said, Kilmainham jail is a former jail/prison in Dublin, Ireland. Hence my shitty pronunciations, because a lot of these things are actually in Irish. Now, one of the things that happens on occasion when we cover a topic like the Kilmainham jail is the building itself has so much history. We kind of have to find that delicate balance of going over that history and getting to the spooky stuff. I think the best example when we've ever done this is actually Robin covering the Ghosts of Gettysburg, which is episode 21. Gettysburg is obviously completely rich in history. There's so much going on there. If you are just a history buff, you could research that for years, and find out new things continuously.
People have.
And there's literally historians that are just dedicated to Gettysburg. So covering it as a topic, it's like, we'll cover some of the history and then we'll get to the spooky stuff. I'd also like to say that may be one of my favorite episodes of all time. Definitely in my top 5. Episode 21. I think I killed it as well. So if you have never listened to episode 21, because maybe you're bouncing all around, give that one a chance. But seriously, it's a delicate balance as people who are putting out this podcast. I don't want anyone who is listening to think like, I'm here for spooky shit. Just get to it. And at the same time, I don't want anyone who is aware of this history to think like, what the fuck? You left out all the best parts. Like, you didn't even mention Harry giving his Triwizard Cup winnings to Fred and George. And side note, yes, he won 1,000 galleons for the Triwizard Cup, and he gave them to Fred and George so they could open their shop.
Their joke shop.
That's how they got it. I had no idea. I Googled what are the best things from Harry Potter that got left out. First thing that came up. So I'm going to try and recap a shit ton of history fairly quickly, and then do the ghost stories justice at the same time. All
I'm thinking about is the fact that Harry Potter was fucking rich at 10 years old.
Yeah, he was rich. He was poor, living under stairs, and all of a sudden it was like, dollar, fucking shot collar. He could have bought everyone those goddamn firebolts.
Well, he bought that.
Just saying.
He bought that whole cart of snackies, that first movie.
He was spending money like he was 10 years old and didn't know what to do with it. All right, so Kilmainham Jail was constructed in the late 1700s and was officially called County of Dublin Jail. It was, at the time, nicknamed the New Jail, simply because there was already a jail in Dublin, but this one was new. Okay. Now that it's 220 years old, we'll just go with Kilmainham, although I might say New Jail every now and then for funsies. So like any jail, people died here. Especially the older a jail is, the chances that one of the inmates might have died there gets higher and higher because so many people have come through. Executions did take place here, but they slowed a bit in the 1820s. Even though this seems like a solid step forward to prevent future ghosts in the 1820s, it did not help much when it came to the 1840s. I know things right now, stepping outside the topic, in the real world, 2020, November 24th, 2020. I know things right now in a lot of places seem shitty. But trust me, 1845 to 1849 in Ireland had it much, much, much worse. And you probably already guessed what it was. So yes, it was the Great Famine, otherwise known as the Potato Famine, otherwise known as, I'm going to give this a shot, Andrahile. And that's Irish, and my Irish is trash, but for the record, I'm trying to use the Munster dialect because there's 3 separate dialects I listened to this, and this is the only one I felt like I could barely pronounce, which translates loosely to hard times, or more precisely to, quote, the bad life. Like, that's what they literally called it, like, shit's just rough right now. Like, that's the era known to them while they lived through it. I picked the Munster dialect because it's one of my favorite cheeses. And I was actually born in a hospital in Munster, Indiana. That's totally 100% true. So, maybe one day we'll cover the Great Famine as a topic because it's just straight up like scary. But without leaving out too many details for a future topic, I do want to state now that roughly 1 million people died due to this mass starvation, and another million emigrated away from Ireland in hopes of finding food. So, to put that in perspective, 20 to 25% of the country of Ireland's population were no longer there after a 4-year period, either because they left or they died. That's 1/5 to 1/4 of a country gone in 5 years. That's insane to think about. During this time, people were so starved and so poor, and evictions were so frequent that they literally sought refuge wherever they could. I read the laws on the books in 1845 to 1849 about how evictions were to be carried out, and if someone's rent was less than a specific amount, it was up to the landlord to pay it. It's like, it's cheap enough, just let them stay there. And eventually they just started evicting those people too because they couldn't afford it. They needed to bring someone in who's like, they have some money, but they can't afford their expensive rent, but they could afford this cheap rent. And it's like barely anyone was doing well, no matter what you were doing. So in order to have just literal shelter and a chance at a sliver of food, people would deliberately commit crimes in order to go to jail. And in a lot of cases, it didn't even mean a bed. It just meant 4 walls and a roof. The lucky prisoners, people that considered themselves lucky during this, got a bed that was made out of metal and maybe even some form of covering while they slept. Like, that was a fortunate person during this time.
Wow.
So, as you can imagine, quite a few folks died during this time because it was a very, very difficult time. Now, another dynamic of Ireland, aside from the way this is built and the rich history in Ireland, and honestly, like most countries, this is a common dynamic that has existed for quite some time, regardless of where you're from, is something known as rebellion. And while I won't get into the dynamic of Irish and English politics circa 1796 to 1930, I will say it's worth a read if you ever want to know what was happening there. Lots of rebellions took place, and lots of them were not technically successful. And it's kind of wrapped up with Kilmainham jail. So one of the first inmates to ever be incarcerated there was named Henry Joy McCracken. He was actually released from the jail in 1798, 2 years after it started being used. He then led the Irish Rebellion of 1798. So he got out and he's like, fuck this shit. And it took about 5 months for it to play out. It was not successful. He wound up being captured and then executed elsewhere in Ireland. In 1803, 5 years later, another rebellion sprouted up, this one led by Robert Emmet, which was again unsuccessful. He was jailed in Kilmainham jail and then taken out into the streets of Dublin, where he was hanged until dead and then beheaded. The next rebellion that connects Kilmainham jail to the culture, so to speak, of Ireland took place during the Great Famine.
Wow.
This particular rebellion is really crazy. A bunch of batshit stuff happened to inspire it. I was reading about how the powers that be were trying to catch the people that they thought were plotting a rebellion, and they literally got rid of habeas corpus, which means they didn't need evidence. It was just like,
what?
They didn't need evidence. They could just catch you and they could just hold you. And so when they found out this had happened, the people that were plotting it were like, fuck it, like, it's a go, like, we gotta do it now. And so it wasn't as successful as they were hoping it would be. And just know that the whole dynamic of this rebellion, there's so much to read into it, but two of its leaders wound up being captured, which was William Smith O'Brien and Thomas Francis Mager, and they were jailed in, you guessed it, the new jail, Kilmainham Jail. They actually weren't executed, which is kind of rare. They were simply exiled forever to Australia.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So is that it for rebellions? No, it's not. There was also the Fenian Uprising, sort of same thing, uprising that was unsuccessful, lots of rebels jailed, again in Kilmainham. And then, in 1910, guess what happened? No, there was no rebellion in 1910. They closed the jail. It was shut down. They said, no more operations for the Kilmainham jail. But then in 1916, there was a rebellion, and they fucking reopened it because they had to. So, this is important, all right? This is the part of the history that I just could not leave out because it's so intertwined. The Easter Rebellion of 1916, also known as the Easter Rising, kicked off on Easter Monday. It lasted 6 whole days. Some of the previous rebellions had been skirmishes, sometimes battles on a larger scale. This time the folks involved seized important and strategic buildings within Dublin. So they seized them, they took control of them, and then they published the Proclamation of the Irish Republic. Basically what this document said is, the Irish own Ireland, suck a dick. And the British were like, oh, we didn't realize that's what you wanted this whole time. We'll just see ourselves out. And by that I mean, they sent thousands of troops to Ireland and literally took troops from the World War I forces, because it was going on at the time, and they told the troops, go fucking quell the uprising and shell the fuck out of any place in Dublin the rebels are in.
What the French toast?
And they did. 2,600 people were wounded over the course of 6 days. 485 people were killed in 6 days. Also, I think it's 45% of those people that were killed were actually just civilians not involved with the rebellion whatsoever. Guess what got brought out of retirement to house the captured rebels? That's right, Kilmainham Jail was where they were going to put them. The new jail is back in business, folks, and hundreds of men and women involved with that particular rebellion wound up there. So, just another failed rebellion, right? Wrong. The Easter Rising was part of a larger revolutionary period within Ireland that took place from 1912 to 1923. And this event was extremely pivotal in Ireland's history. And reading about this and seeing how much history there was just from this event, honestly, it reminded me of the Alamo. And if you're not familiar with American history, check out the Alamo because it is quite similar. And there's the whole thing like, remember the Alamo. So after capture, the British decided that they were going to execute the leaders of the Easter Rising within the confines of Kilmainham Jail. So 14 of the leaders would be dragged out in front of the firing squad. One of those leaders was named James Connolly. He was actually injured during the 6-day battle, and the British still intended to execute him despite his injuries. And I want to note here some interesting stuff about this, okay? A few hours before he was set to be executed, he confided in his wife that he had this fear that the Easter Rising would just be seen as another failed rebellion, and those involved would be forgotten. And he said, quote, they will all forget that I am an Irishman. It's like his sense of patriotism was the most important thing to him, even though he was about to die. And he wanted to be remembered as an Irishman. And the British were so committed to this execution, despite the fact he couldn't walk, that they carried him out on a stretcher to the firing squad, strapped him to a fucking chair so they had better aim, and then shot him to death. Prior to the sentence being carried out, he stated, quote, I will say a prayer for all men who did their duty according to their lights, basically forgiving the people who had been ordered to execute him, because it's a pretty horrific scene to take someone who can barely walk, strap him to a chair, and then shoot him to death. And that's what happened. And I think the way he handled it, despite the fear that he had, is pretty fucking awesome. And it's like, that's 1916, it's 2020. It's 104 years later. I think James Connolly can be remembered as an Irishman, which I think would make him feel a little bit better. The deaths of the other leaders were brutal, just like his, and the Irish people were obviously very upset. What was unanticipated from this entire event is that the news of these executions absolutely fucking horrified and shocked British citizens.
Really?
Who just thought it's too much. One of the leaders the British had captured from the Irish Rebellion had not yet been executed with the other 14. His name was Eamon de Valera, also known as Edward. I'll call him Edward from now on. Part of the reason he had not yet been killed is because he was one of the last people to surrender. So wherever he was holed up, he was going to make them come in and get him.
Wow.
He wasn't surrendering. He wasn't walking out. So because of that, the timing didn't work out. So Edward could not be executed at the same time as everyone else. Once he was captured, he was convicted and sentenced to death almost immediately. But they had to pump the brakes for a variety of reasons. One of them is that his citizenship was in question, as he might be carrying dual citizenship with the United States.
Oh.
So the U.S. Embassy was like, if he's a U.S. citizen, you can't fucking kill him. And on top of that, everyone was trying to get the U.S. involved in World War I, and they knew if they did that, it would damage relations, and they probably wouldn't enter World War I. So everything was on hold. Once it finally got cleared, public sentiment was so outraged at the executions, they decided they weren't going to execute Edward. I read this quote from someone, too, that was basically like, he doesn't have a lot of history. He's not going to be a threat. We don't need to worry about Edward. So he winds up instead just being imprisoned, or being sentenced to be imprisoned for the rest of his life.
What?
So Kilmainham would remain open until 1924. This is the last real notable thing that happens that's absolutely horrific within the walls of this jail. In 1924, it's shut down by the Irish Free State, which was a government that was established in 1922, only 2 years prior.
Okay.
That government was formed by people who were elected into office in 1918, 2 years after the Easter Rising, because that election changed the entire landscape of Ireland, because people were so fucking sick of it that they put these leaders into place that they had the same cause that the rebels have been fighting for. So it wasn't just another failed rebellion. It significantly changed the face of Ireland, literally forever. And before we get into the spooky stuff, one last thing from the history side of Kilmainham. The new jail, as it was originally called, after it was shut down, was actually visited one time by a sitting U.S. president. That sitting U.S. president was John F. Kennedy.
That is absolutely crazy.
He visited this place in June of 1963, and he was actually shown around by none other than Edward de Valera. He showed him the cell he was kept in to let him know what had happened back in 1916. So he understood what it was like, what they had gone through. This is made even more mind-blowing by the fact that the reason Edward de Valera was the tour guide wasn't because of his familiarity with the place. It's because he was the fucking president of Ireland at the time.
Wow.
This guy who probably wasn't going to cause any problems wound up getting elected to be the third president of Ireland in 1959, despite the fact he was originally sentenced to be in jail for the rest of his life. Ireland basically said, like, the Irish are in charge of Ireland, and instead of it being constant rebellions, it became political willpower, and they knew this guy was important, and he wound up becoming a leader in the political aspect too, until the point where they established a government where they were going to elect presidents, which eventually became recognized internationally. And he was the third one. I think they have terms of office for 7 years, and you can renew it twice. So he served for 14 years.
Wow. So
this person who was supposed to be executed in the first place wound up becoming the third president of Ireland. Okay, that's a lot of history. The shortest version of the history of this place that could possibly be told by me. I hope it was interesting. Now let's get to some of the spooky stuff, since we understand the sort of things the jail actually saw. So the prison would have a period of abandonment after 1924, where folks would debate, should it be reopened as a prison, or should it be turned into a national monument, because of how important it was and how closely tied into Ireland's history it is.
It'd be a cool museum.
Yeah, so it took 35 years before a decision was come to, because it was so, vehemently opposed about what it should be used for. And it eventually becomes a monument. So in 1960, it's decided, hey, let's get that place back in shape. And the Kilmainham Jail Restoration Committee gets together and says, let's get it cleaned up. Let's remember the history. The problem is that the history is a ton of death by starvation or execution. So workers sent to do this project, because it's been taken over basically by nature for the last 35 years, they immediately state upon arrival that despite the fact that it's so important and such a part of Ireland's history, it doesn't make them feel warm and fuzzy. There were accounts almost immediately that the general feeling when entering the jail's grounds was just general unease and people said they felt genuine dread depending on where they were.
Wow.
This place was scary when it was in operation. It had now been overtaken by wilderness, so it's not just a scary looking place, it's also in complete disrepair. So to oversee this project, the at the time governor named Dan McGill actually stayed in the warden's quarters. So he just stayed there overnight to make sure the project was going to get taken care of. One of his first nights when he was there, he had been visiting the chapel prior to going to bed. Upon exiting the chapel, he headed to his quarters to retire for the evening. He laid down to enter his slumber and noticed something that kept him awake. The lights in the chapel were on. And
he just turned it off.
He remembered turning them off. But hey, they were on, so he got up, went back to the chapel, and turned off the lights. He then returned to his quarters and laid down for sleepy times. And as he was finally getting comfy, something woke him up. It was the lights from the chapel.
The ghost in there is like, hey, who turned off the lights?
They were back on, and this time he was sure he had turned them off, and something was up. So he gets up, turns them back off, looks around the chapel, no one's there. It was empty. He checks the grounds nearby the chapel to see if someone's hanging around. There's no one there. He returns to his quarters, lays back down, and this part is just me narrating what I think happened, but I see him like getting ready for bed, laying down, like staring out the window, like wide-eyed at the chapel, like this better not fucking happen again. And the lights are out, and he stares at it and stares and finally decides, okay, go to sleep, Governor Dan McGill. I really need to stop referring to myself by full name and title. And in that moment, he probably realizes that his eyes are closed because he's weary. He's tired. He's had to walk back and forth 3 times now. And the thought pops in his head, just open your eyes and check one last time to make sure the lights are out. So he does. And the fucking lights are back on.
I would be like, fuck it. I'm leaving it on. I don't need, nope.
At this part, and this is not me narrating, he gives up. Just hashtag fuck it, the ghost wins. It's just the lights are staying on. The interesting thing about the chapel is that seems like a pretty benign haunting, you know? Like, oh, things are weird. The chapel is notorious for being one of the places that feels the most awful. Like, people go in there and they feel like something evil lives there. The chapel, which is just such a juxtaposition of what the chapel is supposed to be.
Yeah.
So, one of the first things that happens is this ghost is basically saying, like, this is my place, not yours. And the governor's just like, fuck it, whatever. Like, I'm here to oversee this project. Just leave the lights on.
It's just so, I mean, a lot of stuff did happen there. Do you think some, I don't know, entity or spirit was like, you guys doing bad shit? I guess I'll come and hang out, you know?
Or it's someone who was there that was doing bad shit to prisoners who just decided to hang around after the fact. It's hard to tell because so much shit happened here, you know?
Yeah.
And the workers didn't just experience dread. In the new jail, they had actual encounters. A volunteer to restore the jail was working in what is known as the dungeon. While there, they were painting when suddenly they felt like they were not alone. And I think anytime you are alone, you get that feeling on occasion where you just sort of look around like, I think someone's in the room, you know? It's like the air has been disturbed or the ambient dead silence, so to speak. You know how there's just like a silence to a room when no one's in it? Just gets disturbed in some way, your spidey sense starts to tingle, basically. So you just look around like, what the hell's happening? And while looking around, something happened to this volunteer that hasn't happened to most of us, like the spidey sense tingling thing. They were thrown across the room. Clear across the room with no one else in the room with them, and even if there was, the strength and violence with which they were thrown across the room was absolutely terrifying. They were thrown so far they wound up at the opposite wall than they had been painting. And when they were freaking out trying to figure out what to do next, they were pinned to the wall and unable to move. So obviously this guy is absolutely horrified. And he struggles against whatever unseen assailant is pinning him to the wall and moves and slides until he gains enough purchase of his own body to just run away. And when he does, he nopes the fuck out. Now, you know the history of this place. You know how important it is to this culture and to this community. And this dude straight up never came back.
Wow.
Just said, nope, fuck that place. Good luck. Dungeon's haunted. Something hit me. Something pinned me against a wall. I'll never come back here.
I mean, it's a dungeon. Bad things happen in a dungeon. I wouldn't want to. It's in the basement.
Yeah. It's a dungeon in a jail that had people there that were to be executed and had people there during the famine. So it's like probably one of the most messed up places you can go in the world. There's one part of the jail called the Echoing Corridor. It's a long hallway, obviously, that's on multiple levels, so there's stairs, and it has an echo to it. And one of the volunteers was working to fix up the echoing corridor when he heard one of the things that is easiest to hear from far away within the echoing corridor.
Hello.
No, he heard footsteps.
Oh, nope.
And
no.
This person assumed it was one of the other volunteers coming to help, or one of the people that was supervising. So he hears the footsteps approaching and getting louder, and finally he turns to look down the hallway, and there's nothing there. And he realizes that when he looked down the hallway, the footsteps stopped.
No.
They just stopped.
Ooh, got chills. That's
so he's
terrifying.
just like, that's weird. Must have imagined it. And went back to work. And a little while later, he hears footsteps approaching again. And they look around again. Pretty quickly, just decides to look around. And there's nothing there. And the footsteps stopped again. I totally have cold chills.
No.
So he goes back to work. And not long after that, the footsteps start again. So he looks around immediately, and there's nothing there. And it would happen day after day in the echoing corridor. And very quickly, people decided they didn't want to work in the echoing corridor. But they were bringing on new volunteers to do things, so they would say, hey, you want to take care of this project? Sure, I'll go there. So new people would go to the echoing corridor. And one account that I found of someone who went into the echoing corridor and started hearing footsteps is uniquely interesting, because they said they heard the footsteps approaching and decided to focus on their work. And as they got louder and louder, they started to feel a little creeped out. And when they realized that the footsteps had reached them, and they looked to see who was hovering over them,
and there was no
one there, they felt this icy chill pass through them. And that was when they were like, I'm done working in the echoing corridor now.
Yeah.
Anyone who let the footsteps reach them had this same icy chill pass through them. Other volunteers that helped repair Kilmainham jail stated they heard, coming from open areas of the jail, what sounded like soldiers marching. But when they followed the noise, they would just see these large empty areas with no one in them, despite the fact that they heard these loud sounds coming from these exact areas. And this activity wasn't limited to the folks who helped get the jail back into shape. Kilmainham Jail is one of Ireland's most notable tourist attractions, and tour guides and visitors have reported many things over the course of the years. One of the most common things tour guides state that visitors see are what they believe to be, at the time, actors that have been placed around the prison who are dressed in period-appropriate clothing, looking at the groups as they pass through. When they ask the tour guide about these people around the jail, and they look back to where they are suddenly gone. For the record, Kilmainham Jail does not employ any actors, nor do any of its employees dress in period-appropriate clothing. It's the most common thing that visitors, so to speak, see in the jail. So common that the tour guides are like, just don't pay any attention to them. They're actually not there. They're apparitions.
I want to go here.
I'm glad, because I have suggestions that we should go here later on. Visitors who enter the chapel state there is an overwhelming feeling of fear, especially near the balcony. Some people won't even enter the balcony. They just straight up refuse to do it. One thing I found super interesting when I was reading tour guide things and TripAdvisor reviews is that parents that take their children state that despite never telling their kids it used to be a jail or that anyone died there, and they tell their kids it's actually a museum, because it is at this point, their children, when they're getting close to the gates to go in, suddenly feel terrified to the point they start screaming and crying about how scared they are and refuse to enter this jail. They're just not happening.
Wow. Okay.
The building architecture is old, so I won't say that it's not creepy, but I wouldn't say that it's fear-inspiring. Tour guides have even stated that some parents just don't go inside. The kids have such a fit that they just leave. They're like, the kids are too afraid. We're just going to cancel the trip. This is a little bit too creepy. As a side note, maybe some kids at school just tell each other yo, if you ever get taken to that jail museum, act real afraid and you won't have to go in. Who knows? Kids are devious. That might be what's going on here. For folks that do make their way to the cell blocks during the tour, which there will be pictures of on the Instagram, it is frequently reported that folks feel as though they are being watched by something that isn't there from the cells themselves. So they think that some of the people who died while they were residents of Kilmainham Jail are still there and still trapped in the cells themselves. So I think all of this is a good example of something Robin talks about a lot. Some things are so traumatic, it's almost as though they leave an imprint themselves on the surrounding environment. And this place certainly saw horrible things throughout its history, and its connection with the struggle of the Irish Rebellion is something that makes it unique as a historical monument. And despite how much folks want this place to be the keeper of the history because of that tie, it means that this sort of imprint that we're talking about is something that just needs to be accepted. Like if you want to visit this and walk through the history, you're going to walk through the feeling that was there when it was happening, you know?
And it's going to walk through you.
Depending on where you're at, who the fuck knows? So what makes the Kilmainham jail so iconic is also what makes it so spooky, is all the things that happen there. And of all the places that we've covered on the show, I think this one makes the most sense to be haunted. Obviously, the first-hand accounts take with a grain of salt, but it wouldn't be too far-fetched to think some place where all this crazy and awful shit happened would be haunted. And if we ever make it to Ireland, I think it would be amazing to go see.
God,
I would really like to go see
cool.
it. The place where the 14 leaders of the Easter Rising were executed now has a plaque in their honor with all their names on it.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, it's so crazy. It's about 104 years ago was when it happened, you know? And at the time, what happened, it felt almost like this overwhelming sense of loss. Like it was just another step that didn't work, you know?
Yeah.
But somehow it was the straw that broke the camel's back that led to things actually changing. And it's just so crazy to think that this particular leader who is so afraid about being forgotten is now honored there in the place where he died. So it's a very unique place, and I would love to go see it. Indie Cred from Discord stated that when they visited there in 2004, they found it, quote, legit spooky walking through it. So that's a solid review. I think it's only fair that we should check it out too, since one of the spooky friends has been there. So if you're down, I'm totally down. And if anyone has gone there, I just want to go to
Ireland.
If anyone's gone there, by the way, besides Indie Cred, if you want to give us more information about it, please do. I'm super interested. But anyone else that's gone, let us know as well. So that, my spooky friends, is the Kilmainham jail.
Nice. Good job.
Thank you. Appreciate that. There was so much history. Like, I was going through these individual battles from the rebellion, and I was like, I typed in Irish Rebellion of, and it suggested like 10 different years where the Irish Rebellions happened in the last like 200 years. And I was like, oh shit, this is going to be so much research.
But a good job.
I'm really happy I went through it, and I would really love to go see this place. So.
Me too. I think it'd be really cool.
And shout out one more time to Indie Cred for suggesting it, because it was fantastic, and I sincerely hope you folks enjoyed it. So I think that's just about everything we have for episode 154. If anyone has stories they would like to share with us, it doesn't have to be about either of our topics. It obviously can be. But if you have a story that's like spooky, supernatural, ghost stories, spiritual, anything like that, true crime, extraterrestrial, please email storytime@scaryish.com or go to our website, scaryish.com, and click on Contact Us. If you fill out that form, it comes directly to us. You can also hit us up on any of our social medias. Facebook is facebook.com/scarishpodcast. Twitter is @scarishpod, and Instagram is @scarishpodcast. Robin, for folks who would like to donate to us, how can they do so?
You can go to patreon.com/scarishpodcast. Those are monthly donations. There are tiers that start at $8, and at $1 you get ad-free episodes. So that's pretty freaking sweet. And you can also go to Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast. And those are one-time donations. All your donations go to helping us upgrade our studio setup, kind of give us more time to keep doing what we're doing and stay motivated and make more content for you folks.
Indeed.
So, thank you.
So thank you to everyone who listened. Thank you to everyone who participates in the communities. We love all communities, not just Discord. This was just the episode where I want to give a shout out to them because I feel like we haven't talked about them in a little while. So shout out to you folks and anyone who supports us. We love all of you, sincerely, from the bottom of our hearts. So I think that's just about everything we have for episode 154. Robin, go ahead and sign us out.
Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.